Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with this panel. So this is the international session, in case you're not sure which session you're in. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. So I'm Kathleen Salyer with the US EPA. I'm the Deputy Director of our Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery. I'm also the U.S. representative to the G7 Alliance on Resource Efficiency, which is basically sponsoring this panel. And I just wanted to take a minute to tell you about the Alliance on Resource Efficiency. So it was established in 2015 under the German presidency of the G7. And really the kind of goal statement is on the slide there, which I'll let you read. But really it was formed as a way for the G7 countries to collaborate more broadly on what we refer to in the U.S. on sustainable materials management. So it's focused kind of on the materials side, not so much on energy or water. And it's basically a way for the countries to collaborate, share best practices, and really work together to advance resource efficiency in collaboration with businesses, NGOs, academia, and other organizations. So the Alliance has continued through to this year, and under the Canadian presidency this year is continuing. Last year, we developed what's called the Bologna Roadmap, where we identified a number of priorities for the G7 countries to work together under the Alliance. Food waste is one of them. So we took the opportunity to invite, and thankfully the countries agreed to send their food experts to this conference to share with all of you what work they're doing in their countries and kind of some of the innovations. So we only have a short time for this panel. We have a number of speakers. So they're all here through the duration of the conference. So if you're not able to get your questions in at the end, I encourage you to approach them during one of the breaks because they'll all be around. And I know we'll look forward to answering any questions you have. We aren't going to be, so we have 5 of the 7 G7 countries represented. Unfortunately, we're missing Germany and Italy. But we have the EU here also to represent the EU more broadly. So they're going to briefly share with you what they're doing in their countries, some of the major innovations. And then we're going to have hopefully 10 to 15 minutes of time for questions at the end. So please be thinking of your questions now. I mean, I definitely will have some if you don't, but I'll give you guys the first shot and hopefully we can get to as many questions as possible. So with that, we're going to start on the far end, and I'm not going to do introductions. Their bios are all in the program, but we're going to start on the far end with Marie-Claire from France. Take it away.
Thank you.
Oh, I need to pull up your slides.
Do you know?
I know how.
My okay, maybe I get up because it's Paul.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Marie-Claire LHENRY from France. I'm working in the Ministry of Ecology, and it's a longer name, but I want ecological transition and solidarity at the moment. But okay, it's still the Ministry of Ecology in the General Directorate for Risk Prevention, and I'm head of international affairs. So risk prevention is natural risk, industrial risk, but also waste, and so that's why I'm going to focus now. How do I change? Okay. Just to mention that what's the French policy at the moment, you have to understand that food waste is part of a global package with, in the first place, the circular economy. It's now the word you need to use. It's circular economy, and we just adopted a roadmap. So that's food waste is a small part of it, but we have also the plastic waste policy, which is also very high on the agenda at the moment. And of course, food in general, healthy food, safe food, and so that's all kind of different policies which are very important right now. So I will start with the hierarchy on food waste, but I think in US you have also the same kind of a hierarchy. And it's really important because we really are focusing on prevention. And then, okay, it's really, it's really prevention first, then donation to charities, and I think it's also, doing something with food as well. And then feed for animal, and then compost of energy recovery if really you don't have to. So I won't go on the issues we have, because you have the same in US, which is about definition of food waste and how you measure it. And it's clearly something we have to work in France as well, together with other EU member states. So I will rather focus on our policies, what we are doing in France mainly, knowing that of course, one of the very important part of our policy is communication, information, actors' awareness. So that's really, one part of the things we are developing. But because what's really important is that reducing food waste, or as we say in French, I'm afraid in France we use a word which is a bit different than waste when it comes to food, which is gaspillage. So it's kind of spilling of waste, I'm not sure. In French it has a very negative, it's very negative when you say gaspillage, but I don't find an equivalent in English, so. But maybe that's part of the cultural differences as well. So we, to fight against this food production, whatever, we have to focus on all actors. And the first studies showed that food waste is coming from the three major, it's one third. One third is production, one third is retail and transporting, and one third is consumption. And so we have to focus everywhere. I guess that's the main issue. That's why we need so much different kind of information and communication. And in 2000, we started in 2013 with a pact with all actors, which was voluntary. And we started to discuss on measures. And finally, we went to legislation in France in 2015 and 2016. So I'm sorry to say that because the legislation was in 2015, 2016, I don't have a lot of feedback and I won't have a lot of figures to show you how great it is. But, okay, I can explain you what's happening because we're focusing on three main actors. So I will start, going from, starting with the first one, which are, first, all the actors which are collective catering, but public collective catering. That means schools, administration, or canteens. So all of them, they have to have plans to work on food waste reduction. And I must say that especially in schools, for example, that's very important because when you want to change the cultural, if you want people to change habits, you have to start with kids because otherwise, usually it needs one generation to make progress. It might be a bit disappointing, but yes, it starts with kids. And in schools, they can very easily have projects and working together with a canteen. And so it's a win-win because first kids are aware of it and then they're really reducing food. And one example, for example, one of the measures they're doing at school, when the kids come to take food, it comes with a plate, but they will give to the kid only what he wants, not give more. The idea is what you take, you eat it. And I have some reports where some schools, they managed to really decrease the price because they cook less. And they learn, how much really quantity you have to cook to ensure that there is no waste. So basically, that's really the first step. Stop giving food that people will never eat. So at the moment, there is a law saying that all these, it's the law, it's at least an obligation for all public entities to do that. But it's, at the moment, there is a law which is under progress. But the idea is to have this also for private collective catering. Then, second actors is the retailers, or would say large distributors. So there is a law that if they are over 400 square meters as a surface, they have to have a contract with a charity in order to donate unsold products. And also, you might think it was a bit strange, but it's also a legal offense if you spoil edible food. I mean, if you make it intentionally impossible to eat, because that happened at some time. In the back of the supermarket, they would put ammoniac on food to ensure that no one is coming and take it. So that's now an offense. So anyway, this donation, and within a contract, so the legal obligation is a contract with a charity, and then we have a guide to help design the contract. And the idea is to go now further than just this surface. It should be also compulsory for smaller retailers. And then the third and last about business. So at the moment, the only legal obligation is to report in every year. They have a financial report, but there is also a non-financial report about what they do for social and responsibility and so on. And now they have also in line, they have to report what they have to do on food waste reduction. And the idea would be to extend this obligation to all agri-food actors. Yeah, so it's a reporting obligation. So I guess that's where I will stay now and give. Okay, thank you.
So, Giuliana, and you're welcome to stay seated, yeah, if you want.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'm lazy. I remain seated. Let's go from France to the EU. So let's see at EU 28 member states what's going on. I start with just some very quick figures to show how bad we are. I'll start with something bad. So we waste and lose 20% of the food which is produced in the EU, which is 88 million of tons per year. And if you translate in economic terms, it's about 150 billion US dollars. We heard this morning there is a contribution also globally to climate change, and 8% of the global greenhouse emissions are linked to the food waste. So since 2015, the broad frame for EU action is the circular economy strategy, so the concept of circularity in economy, moving away from the linear approach, which means you have to work on prevention, on reuse, and recycle. If you move to the targets, the broad target is the same as the US at federal level, which is that we need to reduce 50% of food waste by 2030, which is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals that is shared at international level. What is interesting to see if you read our circular economy strategy is that when it comes to targets, binding targets for food waste, they're not there yet. That's something which was discussed. There's been some new legislation introduced in November last year as part of a new waste legislation. But there are no specific targets which are binding for member states. There was some discussion at the European Parliament. You know, European Parliament is at the same level of your Congress in the US. And in our co-legislation process, we need to agree with the European Parliament. So the idea was that pending some data analysis and monitoring of collection of data, some binding targets could be introduced by 2023 and to be met always by 2030. So the issue of do we want binding targets for food waste is something that maybe we could reflect on. How much do we want to regulate from the regulator side? How much do we want to leave it open to market forces? How much do we want to leave it to the private sector, to the civil society through educational campaign to change their behavior? Everybody needs to do its part. We have a platform for stakeholders, so we share exactly the same discussion that you heard this morning. Everybody needs to do what it can from the industry, civil society, government level, and the local level. We have the support of FAO and OECD in this platform of stakeholders, and we also share practices and we help member states and also sub-national actors to acquire information and improve their methodology. It's very important, the work which is the same in the US, the work that you are doing and we are doing on improving methodology to collect data, simply because if you want to monitor what's going on, you need to have an harmonized methodology. And if you think about that, we need to develop and have this agreed across 28 member states, this is rather challenging. Just want to recall that information technology, it was mentioned already, the applications that we can download on any mobile phone can make the difference. There is a good case that was in the newspaper. I think it was Politico. I will not mention who paid for the advert, otherwise maybe they take me to court and then I'm completely broke. But it was an app that was developed in Denmark and allows to sell surplus food. So that, and I think you have the same system that can be applicable state level or federal level. I think these are the things that can make the difference. Another one is blockchain technology that you can apply to traceability of food. Again, when it comes to food waste, no wonder that now there is so much attention. One is we are finally changing our global behavior. And the other one is we have the convergences of so many policy areas. The fact that you have the Farm Bill that now is discussing the food waste. We have exactly the same in the EU. For the first time in the Common Agriculture Policy, there is something which is finally addressing food waste. And that's a game changer, not only in the EU and the US, but at global level. I just want to recall, important to collaborate. Also in developed economies, we have a research project funded by our research and innovation program, which is called Horizon 2020, where we have also the involvement of China. So not only internal, domestic exchange of information and best practices, but also to see how we can network with other modernized, developed economies, and also developing countries and economies in transition is very important. I think I would prefer to stop here so you can gain some time, and I leave it open to questions for more details.
Great, Giuliana. Thank you for sharing the EU's perspective. Okay, next up is Susan Fraser from Canada. You want to go on? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay.
So, in Canada, Canadian action on food loss and waste has largely been driven by non-governmental organizations. So I'm going to share a lot of information with you on actions that have been taken that are not our own. The Canadian government and Environment and Climate Change Canada is interested in this issue from the perspective of methane reductions from the waste sector, which make up about 2% of our national inventory. So identifying strategies to reduce food loss and waste is something we've identified as part of the full range of actions that can reduce methane emissions in particular. Otherwise, oops, I could do the first slide here. I'll go along here. Okay. So using the food recovery hierarchy kind of as a guide, I'll just share that on the high level, targets and strategies that have been identified for the full range of actions on food loss and waste are largely ones that have been developed by large municipalities, provinces, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. Work by these entities has really been driven by waste management policies and strategies, climate change policies. And for the private sector in particular, I think the Sustainable Development Goals have been a a guiding force to help motivate action in that area. The National Zero Waste Council is a non-governmental organization primarily made up of large municipalities and private sector. They published just about a month ago a food loss and waste strategy for Canada, which outlines a number of actions that could be taken to reduce food loss and waste in Canada. Many of these are familiar to the types of actions that organizations like REFED have identified: standardized date labeling, packaging innovations, consumer awareness programs, a full range of actions that could be developed in Canada. On the consumer side, on the left side there, in terms of consumer awareness and education, National Zero Waste Council is going to be launching in the next few months Love Food, Hate Waste, the Canadian version of this consumer awareness campaign in collaboration with Canadian retailers to put messaging on how consumers can reduce their creation of food waste. So they'll get that messaging in retail environments and through municipalities. Lots of partners to really deliver the same types of information in a variety of environments. Provinces and municipalities have also been very active in developing online resources on food loss and waste, and particular messaging on how to prevent this from happening. On the diversion side, several provinces have diversion targets specifically related to food waste. These have been part of overall waste management strategies. 2 provinces have implemented already full organics bans on the disposal of organic waste in landfills. And in Canada, most large municipalities have already implemented source-separated organic collection programs. The source-separated organics are primarily composted in Canada at the moment. However, anaerobic digestion is one of those technologies that is rapidly becoming of interest in the country, partly due to policies and regulations that are emerging, the climate or the carbon pricing regulations that are coming along will provide potential offset opportunities for companies developing anaerobic digestion projects, and the Clean Fuel Standard will create a demand for the renewable natural gas that's created in anaerobic digestion facilities. So it seems to be an emerging trend to look at these types of projects as a better way to manage food loss and waste. On the food donation side, I'll just point out in Canada there's liability protection laws in place across the country at the provincial level. About 4 provinces have tax credit programs for food donation from farms, and a variety of organizations have produced guidance documents to assist donators and recipients of food. And as well, there have been programs that have looked at the infrastructure side of food donation. This slide just provides a bit of a range of the kinds of activities. Our department undertook a bit of a taking stock exercise over the last 6 months or so just to try and identify what are the existing activities taking place in Canada right now. The kinds of things at the facility level and the company level are not different from ones that we've been hearing that are in place in the US right now. I'll just identify a few of the kind of collaborative efforts that have emerged in Canada by leading organizations. Provision Coalition it's a network of food and beverage manufacturing associations. They developed an online a food loss and waste toolkit is what they call it, and it's a process that a company can go through. It walks them through the information that you might collect to identify whether you have a food loss issue, what the root cause of that food loss is, puts a value on that quantity of food loss that's created in your facility, and it identifies some opportunities to potentially address some of those issues. It provides a benchmarking opportunity. The association also has a stakeholder collaborative, so they regularly gather folks from the food and beverage manufacturing area to discuss solutions to food loss and waste. The Packaging Association of Canada also highlight that they as well engage in and organize discussion forums, drawing the linkage between food waste reduction and packaging innovations. They also do work to highlight some of the cost savings associated with food loss and waste reduction. And finally, Second Harvest is a non-governmental organization that is currently piloting an online system, foodrescue.ca. They will match potential food donors with food banks and entities that are able to receive donated food. So these organizations have worked primarily on regional scales, but really at the moment are looking to broaden the reach of their activities to a more national scale. And just finally, to highlight some of the activities that my department is involved in, we are collaborating with the US and Mexico in the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, an initiative on food waste reduction and recovery. There was a foundational report that was produced in the spring that characterized the management of food waste in North America, and there are 2 projects ongoing right now due to finish early next year, one focused on measurement approaches and the other on youth engagement. And Environment and Climate Change Canada is collaborating with 2 partner departments, Stats Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, particularly to look at developing a measurement framework to better quantify the amount of food loss and waste in Canada on an annual basis, and to try and quantify where these flows of materials are ending up. And I guess I'll just finish with another kind of emerging policy opportunity. The food policy for Canada is currently under development, and I guess it might be akin to the US, the Farm Bill that we've heard about earlier. An overarching policy that speaks to the environmental, the economic, the social pillars of the food system. Food waste, there was some consultation on that over the last year. Food waste did emerge as one of those areas that's of interest in being brought into that the food policy. So it is still under development, and it does present, though, a potential opportunity to continue work in Canada in this area. That's it.
Great, thank you, Susan. So next up is Nicola Hopley from the United Kingdom.
Hi, yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here. So, the UK, well, we've taken concerted action to address food waste over the past decade, working with our delivery partner, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, known as WRAP. We've been working on food waste since 2007. And since then, total UK per capita food waste has reduced by 14% as a result of a range of policy initiatives, including our voluntary agreements with the retail, food manufacturing and food service and hospitality sectors. This is a level of reduction of which we're very proud, but we certainly want to go further to meet our domestic and international ambitions, such as SDG 12.3. Our latest voluntary agreement with food businesses is known as the Courtauld Commitment 2025, and that has set a collective goal for a further 20% reduction in UK per capita food waste by 2025, and if successful, that will put us on a path for achieving SDG 12.3 by 2030. And if we achieve those targets, that will contribute savings to a value of £20 billion by 2025, and a lot of those savings will be to our householders, as that's a source of considerable proportion of our food waste. So since its launch in 2016, the Courtauld 2025 commitment has secured more than 150 organisations as signatories, either in or with interest in the food and drinks industry, and that represents 95% of our UK food retail market. So we're really pleased with the level of signatory activity we have. And we'll be tracking progress to achieve our target carefully with annual progress reports, and we will be publishing our UK food waste estimates at milestones years throughout the agreement. So in terms of how it works, everybody in the UK has a part to play in achieving this challenging ambition. A key element of it is sector-level collaboration, which is an important way of unlocking the barriers to action and ensuring we have a level playing field across the sectors. Businesses working within any one sector often face similar barriers, similar information needs, and often do not have the means to act alone. So this is where WRAP really works well for us, because it brings together the industry stakeholders in a pre-competitive space where they can share information. And at the moment we're focusing on key product categories, and those are initially fresh produce, dairy and meat. And these sector groups come together to take a whole chain, farm to fork view and include representation from primary producer and grower bodies, manufacturers, retailers, and hospitality and food service. And the purpose of these working groups, there's 5 key aims that they have that they're working on. Firstly, to identify food waste hotspots. So that's looking at where one part of the supply chain can influence another part of the supply chain, so we can bring and come together and think collaboratively. We can look at the barriers that exist to reducing food waste in those particular sectors and agree solutions within the context of any technical or commercial constraints that may apply, and share insights from the different representatives, and also develop best practice, which can then be cascaded more widely within the industry. So those are that's the way our working groups operate. In addition to those working groups, we also are looking very closely at surplus food redistribution. We've had an awful lot about this morning, and it's a key issue in the UK as well. Clearly, a resilient supply chain will always have some surplus. So we're working closely with businesses and redistribution organisations, including the charity sector, to make sure that surplus food can be sent to feed people in need rather than go to waste. And most recently, we announced a charitable fund of £500,000, which has been available for charities to bid into to get additional funding to facilitate that work. Another priority for us at the moment, again, we've heard a lot about already, is around supporting businesses to measure their food waste. As we know, one of the first steps a business can take is to really understand the food waste that's occurring within that business so that it can take steps to address it. So we've worked with a range of business representatives this year to develop a set of principles and a resources guide to help them measure their food that goes to waste. And this is all in line with international best practice. There's already some good examples in companies in the UK who do already measure and publicly report their food waste, most notably some of our retailers, such as Tesco, but we do want to see this more widespread across the UK. And also want to touch on the issue of food waste within homes. In the UK, 70% of our food waste post-farm gate occurs in households, so it's a key area for action. We have had quite a lot of success already. Household food waste is down by nearly 1 million tonnes in the UK compared to 10 years ago. But we do know there's a gap between people's awareness of food waste as an issue and what we do in our own homes. So a recent survey that RAP undertook showed that around 60% of people simply believe that they don't waste any food or hardly any. But in reality, we know from the figures it's higher than that. And the main reasons why we all waste food tends to go unnoticed. So we may cook too much or not use up leftovers, or we don't use food in time. So these are the key issues we're now addressing. We've had success with our Love Food, Hate Waste campaign and taking quite a broad brush general approach to addressing household food waste. But we're now starting a more targeted approach. So the plan is working through our Quartile 2025 agreement to concentrate on those food products which we know are wasted the most. And we're also engaging with those people who we know waste the most. So our initial focus is going to be on 2 common behaviours in the home that can reduce food waste, and those are making sure we buy the right amount of food to feed ourselves and storing it to make sure it lasts longer. So knowing which foods to put in the fridge, understanding date labelling, and having clear storage advice on packs. We've recently run some successful campaigns focused on potatoes, bread and poultry, and those are some of our key most wasted products. So that's quite a rapid overview of what we're doing in the UK, but happy to take any questions or discuss further with any of you during the conference.
Thank you, Nicola. Okay, so our final speaker is Toru Terai from Japan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Toru Terai, Deputy Director at the Recycling Promotion Office of the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. I'm going to talk about measures to promote reduction and recycling of food waste in Japan. As a Japanese word, mottainai represents, traditionally we Japanese respected and valued food very high. However, as our economy grew in the late 20th century, we had much more food than we actually needed. And as a result, we got to have less respect to food. Now, food waste issue is one of the most important environmental issues in Japan, as well as in other countries, previous countries. And Japanese government, national government, is now strengthening its measures to reduce and recycle them. Today I will talk about both reduction, prevention, and recycling of food waste. First one is reduction of food waste. As well as the previous countries, we think that prevention of waste is most important. We think so, and however, it is a little bit difficult in case of food waste to reduce the amount of inedible portion, because we cannot eat like a watermelon without disposing its peels. Inedible portion are generated as we eat daily food in daily life. Thus, our priority is to reduce the amount of edible portion wasted without eating. On June 19th this year, just a week ago, Japanese government has made a new basic plan for next coming 5 years to realize sound material cycle society. In this new plan, a new goal was set. It says that by fiscal year 2030, we halve the amount of edible portion wasted from households. We consider that this new goal is along with SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. In order to achieve this new goal, the national government is now working on awareness raising and education programs, because we think that changing consumer behavior is the most critical to reduce food waste from households. And in order to change consumer behavior, these two, awareness raising and education programs are most important. For example, we encourage people to check their fridge more frequently in order to not to forget consuming foods which are due best before date. And in elementary schools, teachers tell students the importance of foods so that children finish dishes which were prepared for them. We are also taking measures to reduce food waste from food-related businesses. For example, since doggy bag is not so common in Japan, we are now encouraging people to use it more often. Also, we are encouraging businesses to change its business practices, which leads to wasting foods. Wasting foods. And new technologies also help us reduce food waste. Some food-related companies are now introducing new technologies which predict the demand of food products more accurately. So it predicts the most possible amount of demand using big data analysis. By using this prediction, food manufacturers and retailers can prepare most appropriate amount of food products, and thus they can reduce food disposed without consumed. In order to strengthen these kind of measures, we are now planning to set a new reduction goal for businesses as well as households in coming years. Next, I will talk about recycling. We enacted food recycling law in 2000. This law is composed of requirement for food businesses and deregulation for food recycling companies. First, this law requires food industries, such as food manufacturers, retailers, and restaurants and cafes, to recycle their food waste into feeds or fertilizers. And if a company generates food waste more than 100 tons a year, it is also required to report the amount of food waste they generated and how they treated them in each year. When their efforts are not enough, the national government can order an improvement. On the other hand, the food recycling law reduces regulations. Generally, in Japan, when a recycling company transports waste, it is required to get permission from the local government. This imposes a lot of cost for recycling companies, especially when they transport waste across local government borders. The food recycling law exempts this regulation. When a recycling company satisfies some requirement, it does not need to get permission anymore. As a result, recycling companies can transport and collect more food waste from a wide area more easily. Thanks to the food recycling law, the most recent survey shows that about 85% of food waste from food businesses were recycled in 2016. Let me talk about an example. I love Starbucks coffee. I love it the best among several coffee shops. And actually, yesterday, I went to Starbucks in front of Harvard Square and enjoyed 2 cups of cafe latte. And Starbucks Japan, a local Starbucks company, is now promoting recycling of coffee grounds. It recycles them into cattle feed and fertilizer. Then it grows cattle and vegetables using them. And finally, it consumes milk and vegetables at its store. According to its recycling plan, it recycles more than 2,000 tons of coffee grounds every year. Recently, this kind of recycling loop is getting more and more common in Japan. And we welcome this kind of activity because it not only reduces the environmental impact of economic activity, but also raises public awareness about the importance of food and food waste recycling. Reduction and recycling of food waste is one of the most important environmental issues in Japan. We are going to reinforce our efforts to reduce and recycle food waste in order to achieve our national goal in 2030. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Toru. So we did pretty well on time. I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. So actually, I'm gonna stand up so I can see people better. Oh, great. And they're gonna have mics that they can go around the room with. Again, thank you all for those great presentations. I think it was very interesting and informative, the similarities, right, of some of our challenges and then the differences in approaches. So very informative. So go ahead, first question.
I'll just do this question actually is for Julia. I live in Copenhagen. I realized that some of I'm familiar with the technology that you're using, which I shall not name so I don't get sued. But I do find one of the biggest problems in terms of reducing food waste is not just the upstream, obviously there are things that can be done, but downstream, for example, food donation laws, at least in Denmark, and I can imagine as well in the EU, are hampered a lot by food safety laws. So I can tell you that we have so many chefs, restaurateurs, farmers that would like to do something with their extra produce or with their goods or with their leftover or excess food, but by law they cannot give it away for free. They can sell it, but they can't give it away for free. Things like livestock, food extras for livestock, that's also considered illegal as well, regardless if it's, you know, a large entity or a small restaurant that's doing a small farm. I think the working across purposes, is the EU doing anything to address that problem?
You want me to reply now, or?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very, very useful question. There are guidelines at EU level. As I was saying, the legislation is something that is not developed yet. So we have this new methodology and monitoring provisions which are contained in the waste legislation, but in terms of prevention, we don't have it. But we have guidelines. So guidelines are not legally binding, but what happened, sometimes they're used by the European Court of Justice in case there are some case laws or somebody goes to the European level of court. So when the judges, they have to make their interpretation of the law, they can refer to the guidelines. And we have guidelines, EU guidelines for food donation, and also very recently, I think they were endorsed in April this year, food to feed guidelines, which is what you were saying. When can we use the food also for feed purposes? To my knowledge, for a long time in the EU, we had the issue and also all the consequences of the mad cow disease. So for a long period, we couldn't use for feed the normal food for that, for the reason, for the health and safety concern that you are raising. I think that has been overcome, but when it comes to member states, it is still left to the member states to decide how they want to regulate. If we will arrive to more stringent or binding targets, we have to see. As I said, it will depend to a large extent on the data collection and monitoring exercise that we are starting now, and then we will draw conclusion by 2023.
Great, thank you. Additional questions? Yes. Microphone.
That's okay. First of all, congratulations, Mary Claire. It's great to see the French leading the way on a lot of the food, well, from the front end, the reputation the French have around food, but also on food rescue and food waste.
Can I just check that everyone can hear you okay? Or does he need a mic? He needs a mic. Sorry.
Compliments, which is good.
I heard.
Hi. With the laws that have come into effect recently about it making it illegal to throw food that's perfectly good out, I'm interested to hear a little bit about if the country has the infrastructure to absorb all this new rescued food and what kind of bottlenecks or challenges are now on the other end now that there's a huge surplus that's being directed to people in need or to various channels.
Thank you. At the moment, we don't see that many problems. The first assessment we have from this law is, in fact, there were already donations before, and that only increased the number of donations. And from the charities, we heard that more or less it increased by 20% what they get from when they go and collect food. And from because we have the ADEME who is making this assessment, we understood that now, and before there was 60% of the retailers which are in the scope of the law, which were already doing donation, and now it's a bit over 95%. So there is really an increase, but we haven't seen that as a problem at the moment. I guess the only, and we have the French agency, which is supporting and financing, and they are mainly financing trucks or storage to improve. So that's basically the main logistic issues, but funding is provided.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Please.
Thank you so much for your insights. It was really inspiring. It was interesting to hear that you don't have a food donation effort in Japan, but maybe because the food insecurity is not as high. I'm curious about, in the earlier panel we talked about, in a policy panel we talked about in this country, needing to really push policies that incentivize reduction before donation and making sure that we're not getting businesses to have more waste but donate more and getting advantage from that. I'm curious if you've had that experience in your countries and what are some of the lessons learned and iterations that you've been through.
Who would like to take that question first, or only Nicola?
Yeah, in the UK, it's a key aspect of all our policy making is ensuring that we adhere to and incentivize the food waste hierarchy. So prevention is absolutely the best option. And in terms of thinking further down the hierarchy, our aim is to reduce surplus in the first place. Clearly, where there is surplus, and we think there always will be some in a good, secure food system, where there is some surplus, that should always be redistributed. And our overall aim is that good food is always eaten rather than going to waste. So yeah, prevention is certainly the number one priority for us.
Any other thoughts, Marie-Claire?
Yeah, maybe I guess as a moment we don't have these legal requirements, so we don't have the problems that we are mentioned, but we have to be careful to avoid the situation where people would just show nice figures just by not doing prevention, but just having more waste in order to have more composting or more whatever, more. So I think it's, but that reminds me of some, that's already a long time ago, but there was one time within EU where we had so much, I mean, the agricultural policy was, I never understood anything about this agricultural policy, I must say, but the fact is there were some production requirements, so we have too much milk and too much butter or too much, and one day we decided to stop with that. And there was all the charities were complaining, because they were used to have all this amount of food that was available to come and pick up, because there were large EU storage where were coming all the milk, all the butter, or whatever. So, but if you think about it, it's, yeah, then they adapted, of course. I mean, because basically the main, the objective is not just to produce surplus, it's just to, and then you adapt and you improve the collection or something. Because if you had just too much production, too much surplus, too much, you just, people get used to this waste and spill, I would call it. Yeah. So.
Toru, you want to add?
Yeah, Japan also doesn't have regulation of the food distribution neither, but now it's getting a big policy issue, and so now a new legislation is under consideration in the diet, but it's not a mandate. It's a voluntary distribution of food waste, no food. And but the problem is that in Japan, the culture of donation is not so common. So food bank is not so, the capacity of food bank is not so strong, not enough. So before having a mandate regulation, we have to have enough food bank capacity. So we don't have it yet.
Great. Thank you. Any additional questions? Yeah, in the back there?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Chang. I'm working on a Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation project on reducing food loss and waste. So in APEC, in region, we have like 21 economies. So when it comes to regional problem, then one of the purpose of our project is the food loss and waste measurement. And when we start to measure, then we face the problem that the definition of food loss and waste is really different from different economies. Edible part of food is different. Like for example, in Japan, you eat like tuna eyeballs, something like that, and or chicken feet is edible in Asian country, but probably in Western countries is inedible. So it's one problem that we face in our APEC diverse economies, because APEC includes Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, the US also, and the second problem that is the measurement. Now we have like literature review. There's like 10 existing methods. Then it's so confusing that we don't know if top-down method is more efficient or bottom-up is more efficient in regional, like when it comes to regional cooperation. So because at the beginning I saw the slide, this is like G7 alliance. So I would like to ask like whether you have recommendation or you have experience to share with us, because we are on the process of measuring food loss and waste in our APEC region. Yeah, thank you.
You know, I'll just start with the answer and then go to you guys. And I'll start with what you ended with, is the Alliance doing anything with measurement? Actually, measurement, not specifically focused on food, but generally on sustainable materials management was one of the priorities areas for under the Bologna roadmap from 2017, and that work I think is just starting. I think the UK was going to try to help initiate some of that work. So I would say yes, not specifically focused on food. I mean, I think you've touched on what we talked about if you were at the federal panel, is kind of some of our big challenges are definitions and measurement in the US. So I'll turn it over to the panel to kind of chime in on their perspectives.
If I can briefly, I think in the EU, I would summarize that the approach that is used in the platform of stakeholders that we have is a combination of top-down and bottom-up, but is mainly driven bottom-up. So you have this platform because you want to hear the different voices and you want to see if you can use the best coming on the table. So and on top of that, you have the support of international organizations like FAO and the UNEP and OECD. So they come with some consolidated methods there. So if it can be useful to you, maybe I can pass you some information later on.
Your microphone, yeah. Do you mind just repeating real quickly?
I'm sorry. So now we are using the mass flow method of proposed of FAO in 2011. Yeah. So we use the food balance sheet to calculate the amount of food loss and waste in APEC region, but it seemed to us that is not really reliable source. I don't know, but yeah. So you suggested that we can use FAO methodology and.
No, I was just informing you about what is coming up as a result of this platform that we have in the EU, which is just using FAO as a source of inspiration and ideas, but then it is integrated with other ideas from stakeholders, including the industry or the civil societies or the subnational level. So probably in the APEC context, you could think also in involving, I don't know if you can as a mandate, but involving national on the industrial level to see if they can come up with some ideas. But maybe we can exchange, I can give you some details after closing here.
Yeah, okay, I will come to you later. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, unless anyone has anything very quick to add, we do need to close the session. Okay, so let's give our international panel a big round of applause. And definitely want to thank you all. We know you traveled long and far to be with us today and share what your countries are doing. So very much appreciated. Thank you.